Chapter 26, setting up plan and profile sheets. And that would be from name boundaries. In the last chapter, chapter 25, we talked about how to set up those name boundaries. And then I actually went just a little bit further than I intended, and we actually started setting up the plan and profile sheets. I'm still going to start this chapter off where I intended, and that is once we got the boundary set up, next we're processing the sheets. So if you've already processed your sheets, don't worry about that. Just kind of hang tight and just watch this until I get caught up to where you are, which is having sheets. It won't hurt to go over this again anyway, since it's such a new concept, just to kind of get used to it. So now that the name boundaries are in place, we need to go over to the lower right hand corner where it says Manage Name Boundaries, and that brings up this dialog here. And like I was saying before, I like to keep the Show Create Dialog button toggled so that I can take a look at the settings before I actually process the sheets. And so if I look at what we have here, kind of expand out, we've got the two plan sheets, two profile, two plan boundaries, two profile boundaries. They're all part of the same group and they're linked together. So really, to create those sheets, all I need to do is create a data point on the group name, right click and select Create Plan and Profile Drawing, and then it's going to bring up this dialog, Create Drawing. We did talk about this a little bit in that last chapter. Like I was saying, I think by default this comes up as 1 to 1. I think that's supposed to be 1 to 50, so I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and change it. And then also by default, you can annotate the plan and the profile after the fact, or you can use, you can actually kind of do two things at once here. You're generating the drawing file, you're generating the sheets file, and you're annotating at the same time these annotation groups that are already set up for us. And by default, it looks like the profile grid is set up, which I would imagine you'd want to do that the majority of the time, even though, like I said, you could annotate after the fact. And as far as the plan view annotation, that might depend on if you are doing work for IDOT or a county or something else. This doesn't have much annotation in it yet, but it does have at this point the north arrow. The north arrow, if you have this turned on, the north arrow automatically comes in at the correct rotation and uses the proper cell, for IDOT anyway. Well, this is a county highway, and it's okay to use the IDOT north arrow. And it is located within District 5, so I'm going to select that. And then a couple choices at the bottom. Open model when it's finished, yeah, that's fine. Adding the sheet to index, like I think I've said before, I personally prefer to do that later. So I'm going to leave it turned off. You could have that turned on, and once you do this enough times, you're probably okay to do that. It's just that when you're first getting started, I think you find yourself sometimes having to do this a couple times to get it just the way that you wanted to, and then you have to delete the files out of the index and do this and that. So you might be better off just to leave off the add to sheet index, and we'll do that later. Okay, let's click OK, and it's creating my drawing file, it's creating my sheets file, and when it's done, it's going to open up the very last thing it did, which was create the last sheet. Okay, let's go up and look at, it might be easiest just to pull this out here, this manage view groups so we can see what it created for us just now. So we set up in the previous chapter the sheet boundaries in the default model, but just now when I hit process, it created a drawing view and a sheet view for each plan and profile boundary. So let's take a look at each one of those. First we'll go to the plan view. And the plan view again is the type of model is called a drawing model. And this is where you will do all of your labeling and and when I say labeling, I mean just placing basic text, or that labeling could be like a certain type of annotation, or placing these tools that we have called like place label. And when you place the label, and this is going to be in a separate chapter, so I won't talk about this now, but we have new ways of with this automated labeling, where it automatically, like let's say you're labeling typically a station offset. In Geopack you would have used the Geopack plan view labeler, and it would automatically know the station offset and it would place the text. Well, this is somewhat like that, but just a completely different system. This one uses something called text favorites and or cells. It kind of depends on cells have the ability to put like a box around the text and things like that, but I don't want to go off on that tangent because, like I said, that is a separate chapter. So let me stop talking about that. You notice that the sheet is rotated, and in this case, really back in using Geopack, there were two different options. IDOT internally and many of the consultants use the option of rotating the reference file to make the sheet horizontal, and there was advantages and disadvantages to doing that. The main advantage, and the number one reason why they went that route, was so that they could place multiple sheets in the same file, just kind of in a big line, and that's how they operated for many years. Now that's not really an option. Not really I guess technically you could if you did it all manually. Not a good idea, because then none of this annotation stuff would work. I definitely wouldn't recommend attempting to set up sheets the old method. I'm sure a lot of people will try just because that's what they were used to, but really ORD is just not set up to work that way. I would definitely recommend setting up sheets the way this whole system is set up, and that is doing what we are doing right now. And that is setting up this drawing model, setting up the sheets model, using the sheet index. You get your sheets automatically numbered for you. You can very quickly jump to different sheets. It's I'm just going on and on about this because I know there's going to be a lot of people tempted to operate the way that we did in Power Geopack, and it just would not be a good idea. So here we go. So we just talked about this, and remember in that last chapter I talked about the default setting of the number of chords of this sheet border was set to 5. So if you select any of these, or you look at it or snap to it, you can see that it's kind of follows the alignment, and so that can be okay. Maybe that's good by default. Ultimately, like for instance, if I look at that last sheet, or maybe the one before, let's see. Oh, I guess I had the image turned off, the display turned off. But when that display was turned on, you could see that there'd be a lot of cleanup work to do in this sort of thing. And so the boundaries, that clipped boundary that we're used to clipping with a fence, using this method does not use a fence. It actually uses the boundary to clip, the reference files. So you should probably know that you can go back to that default model where those sheets were initially cut or boundaries placed. And you can use just basic MicroStation tools here, and you could go to the insert or delete vertex tools, and I could just hover over one of those vertices and get rid of them after the fact if I want. And now you're going to have that straight line, and there'll be times where you want to do this, times you don't want to, or you'll know just right from the get-go that you definitely don't want to do this, and then you could have just changed the number in the dialog when you initially processed those sheets. But really, I could modify this sheet really in any way I want. No matter what I do to these boundaries, it's going to be reflected in the sheets. So that's actually pretty nice. I do like that. So I tell you what, let's go to the sheets. We should probably talk about the sheets model itself, and you should probably have an understanding of how it works so that you can more efficiently label your title blocks and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to go to Plan 1 sheet, and a couple things here. Notice right away that look across the top. I deleted those vertices, and now you got that straight line of a border. You might still want to move it around a little bit, which you can. One thing you definitely need to know about this system is it uses something that in the past we always encourage people not to do, but it uses that system, and it's okay as long as you understand it. It's called live nesting, and that basically allows you to see the files that are referenced to your reference file. And then it goes back, and then you can set the number of how many times it will go back. So you see a reference of a reference, or reference of a reference of a reference, And so anyway, by default, that's the way that this is set up. And we will continue to use that live nesting. And it needs to use this. And one of the reasons why it needs to use it was because the way that the system works is that this actually, the sheets model, and it automatically did this for you, but it referenced the drawing model, but there's really nothing in the drawing model except for your labels, right? So it needs to be using this nested, live nesting with a certain nested depth, and by default this is set to 99, and that could be changed if desired. Once you understand how this works, and you could make a decision if you want to change any of these default settings. We're just going to leave that at 99. And so you can see what's happening here is that, remember when we first set up that sheet, the sheet borders, and I said whatever you attached to that sheet border design file model would then show up in the sheets file, and that's what you're seeing here. It automatically showed up in the drawings model, and then it shows up in the sheets model. In fact, depending on your settings here, and this is I only want to tell you so much. We don't want to get way carried away with some advanced settings with like something called configuration variables, or where the user can kind of reconfigure. I think once you use this a lot, you might find a preference as to the way that you work. In later, we can maybe have more of an advanced chapter and talk about those types of things. But we can set this up to where when you turn a level off in one file, then in all of your Sheets files, that level is turned off. Do things like that, because otherwise what you're going to find, you're going to end up spending a lot of time. In this, it works perfectly fine, and this is how I initially operated. I would go in to open up each sheet individually and then turn on and off the levels of what I wanted on in that particular sheet, which is usually the same in all your sheets. So that's why a lot of times it works better just to do that more globally than in that particular sheet. But yeah, you can see in the hierarchy in our levels here that you can see when we process this, and I think I had mentioned this before too, that whatever display when you process this is turned on, that's what's going to end up in the Sheets file. And because I had the display of the image file turned off, by default it's turned off in the Sheets file. Now I can always turn that back on, but by default that's what's going to happen. And then if I do a save settings here, then it's going to hold that in case I go back to that original, change it. I think as long as I did the save settings, that it will remain and not get overridden. Another thing that you probably need to know is that this does oftentimes require a little bit of cleanup. Like I'm looking at this sheet, you're like, yeah, it's close, but let's say if I want to leave that image on, especially for a phase 1 project report or something like that, I want it to look a little cleaner. You can see this big space at the top and no space at the bottom. So I can still use my regular reference tools, and I could select the plan view. So it's only selecting the reference plan view. And then, you might want to turn your regular AccuDraw on. And then I can use my tools, move the reference file, I data point anywhere, and because I have AccuDraw set, it's only going to go straight up or over, or you could have used locks. But if I want to go exactly straight up, I'm going to do it this way, and then I can kind of just visualize how much it's going up, data point to accept, just move that any place that I want. Like I previously mentioned too, you can, if it's clipping something, and I want to make sure that if I want to do a clip mask like you're used to, or you want to expand the limits, so you're not going to, this works differently. You're not going to re-clip the reference file, because the clip method is more of a live type method. The clip method uses the sheet border. Now if you want to do a clip mask, I believe you cannot do it right here in the sheets, but if you do go in that original design file and you want to mask something out from that reference file, I go back to that default, and here if I did a regular MicroStation mask, for instance, maybe I want to mask out, let's see, maybe say for the alignment, maybe I want to mask out that curve data and I want to place my own curve data, whatever it may be. It doesn't really matter. I could mask all the files or one of the files, and this is not new or anything. Of course, place fence around, whatever, and then I go Tools, Mask, and then I mask it out here at this location, which is again a little different than what you're used to. Normally if you mask something, you would have done it right in the sheets, but here I had to do it back in the default. So then notice when I do go into that sheet view, that you can see that I can't see the curve data because the masking is taking place there. And so that's how you mask using this new method. Same thing with the profile. You want to move that around. You select the profile, tools, move. Again, this is hit undo. Very, very different than what we're used to, because you notice that the grid moved too, and that probably seems odd in a way, because in the past our sheet was a cell, and that cell contained the grid itself. So if I was to move that reference file, just the profiles would have moved, not the grid. But because of the way that the annotation takes place of the profile, the annotation actually includes that in the profile view. So let's take a look at that. Let's look, just like the plan view had a model, the profile for sheet 1 also has a drawing model. Looks like this, and again, this is where the grid is located, and this is annotation. And so, whether it be, this text at the, any of this information, it's all automated. And when I processed the sheet borders, I had annotation turned on, and that's the reason why it's done for me, already. Now, you may or may not choose to do this individually or later. One reason I can see right off the bat why you might want to do it individually is because, look at that, it looks to me like the way IDOT currently has their environment set up for the special ditch profile strip grade elevations, they're coming in at the exact same location as the roadway strip elevations, which you wouldn't want, because now it's on top of itself. So this is probably a good time to talk about how you can just annotate in the drawing model itself. Whether you want to change something, or you just want to do this initially, whatever the case may be. In order to do that, we go up to our Drawing Production tab. I'm going to go over to, there's two annotating choices here. One is specifically for the element, and then the other is to annotate the entire model, or models, you'll see. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove all the annotation, and it says, do you want to do that just in this model or all the models? I'll say, yeah, go ahead and do it in all. So that got rid of the grid anyway, and then the element annotation for the profile, I can also remove that. And let's see, I'll say, yeah, let's say yes. And I'm going to click on the profile, and I got rid of all that annotation. So now I can go back and kind of individually do that if I wanted to. Well, for the grid, let's go ahead and do that first with the whole model. I'll just say yes, and there you can see that I can annotate the grid at this level in the model. And notice, because I said yes, it annotated not just this model, but sheet 2 as well. Okay, let's go back to the profile view in 1. Okay, now here's what you might have to do initially, because that elevation for the special ditch profile is coming in at the same level. One way that you could handle that would be, when you annotate, maybe just annotate first the special ditch profile. Reset to, well, let's see, I guess that didn't work. Let me select the profile. Okay, one more time. Annotate element. I'm just going to say no, just do this. I'm going to hover over the special ditch profile, data point on it so it's selected, reset to complete. There we go. So now we're seeing that strip grade elevation of the special ditch profile, and then typically in the past we've always done this, and I think we kind of had to do this in Geopack too, if I remember right. So I just want to grab just the elevations in my selection set. Looks like I've already got AccuDraw turned on, So now I could hold my right mouse key down. That's one way to get to the move command. Just regular MicroStation move, data point, and then I just go, go straight up, and there we go. Moved it out of the way. And so now I could go back and then annotate my existing profile and my proposed profile. Reset. Looks like I have to do one at a time. Okay. I'm going to go to my existing profile. Reset. And there we go. So there's my strip grade increment for my existing and my proposed profiles, as well as my special ditch profile. And of course, we're going to be doing some, additional labeling. Some of it's automated, in the sense that it'll automatically know the station and elevation, that sort of thing. And then some's going to be basic text, but we are going to do that in a separate chapter. And the last thing I want to talk about with setting up your sheets is in the sheets model. We could talk about this in, I guess, the labeling. We probably will go maybe a little bit further with it. Well, first of all, let's talk about the sheet border itself. Like I said, it's not a cell. It's pointing to a design file of a particular model. So there it is right there. There is the reference file it's pointing to. So let's just hover over it and see what it's pointing to. So that is pointing to IDOT Consultant standard sheet borders. So that's not, part of the working set. This is just your standard IDOT, most basic model. In fact, I could double click on that, and then I could see that, that file, the sheet border file, has multiple models within that file, and those models contain, each one of the different types of plan sheets. And so by default, it knew to use plan and profile, which that is correct, and that's great. Now, what happens if you want to make some changes to this, like especially if you're doing work for a county, for instance, especially if you are a consultant and you want to add your consultant logo down here, these kinds of things, that you may want to set that, set this up, or point, not necessarily set it up, but point to a different location. And that's really part of why we have the work sets, right? And so let's go ahead and just kind of learn about this a little bit, these sheet borders. Let's go ahead and select that reference file, and let's just right click on it, and let's go ahead and just open up that design file, and we can open that in a new session. If we do it this way, then you don't have to figure out how to browse to it. Open in a new session. So it's just going to automatically open up another instance of ORD, and it's going to take me to that design file that contains the sheet borders. And let's see, yeah, I'll go ahead and associate it to a working. So that just so it, you get the same colors and everything that you're used to seeing for IDOT work. And here it comes. So taking a minute to open up. So here it is. So we are just sitting in a design file. And if I click on the models button, I will then see all the different models that contain the sheets. Well, and actually, now that I look at it, I guess actually the sheet border actually is still a model. It's a different model than what we used before because it's been modified so it works with the proper annotation, but you do have a sheet cell sitting in each one of these models. In the particular one that we were using was, yeah, plan and profile. So at this location, some changes that you might want to do so you don't have to do this over and over again is you might want to go ahead and add your consultant logo to this location, and then you won't, in the future, you won't have to add it to every single sheet. Once you get that set up, if you're a consultant and you get that set up properly, and that's all I would change at this location. I would not, I know consultants for county work, they're going to change this from state of Illinois to county information or specific project information. You would not want, at this location anyway, to make any of those changes. The only thing I'd recommend doing is probably just adding in your consultant logo. And then the next step that you're going to do, you're going to save this. You're going to do a save as, and we're going to point to the specific work set, and then we can put project specific information on that sheet border, and then we only have to do it one time. We don't have to go to every single sheet and do this. So this is definitely the most efficient way to operate. So I'm going to back up to the IDOT consultant folder, and then I want to go to work sets, and then I'm going to choose this project, which was student 1, and I go to standards and sheet borders, and we can just keep that same name, IDOT sheet borders, and I'm going to go ahead and save it. So now what I've just done there is I've saved a copy of the IDOT sheet borders, and that copy is in my work set for this project. So now would be a good time to make all those changes. Like, for instance, if this is not a state job, you can let's see, I should be able to just double click on that, bring that up and say, well, and then I just do this one time only. This happens to be, say, County Highway 14, or put the FAP, or whatever you want to do to change that part of the sheet cell. And of course, when you change that, it's only changing just the one model. In that case, it's plan profile. If you got a big job that contains all sorts of other sheets, then you're going to have to make that same modification to the other models. And then also here, if you now there's a couple ways that you can do this. And to me, I prefer to do it this way. Now, I'm going to show you maybe one other way that works with a work set that will automatically populate this information, and you could do it that way too. Multiple ways that we can that we can fill in the information, but it's nice if we can just get the most efficient way of doing this so we're not changing every single sheet. One part from that working set, though, and one thing that I'm not going to populate here is anything that changes on the sheets, and that would be like sheet numbers, total sheets, say contract number, for instance. There's only going to be one contract, right, for everything, so you could go ahead and make that addition here, and then you're done with it. It shows up everywhere. But for the sheets model itself, like, you may end up having additional plan and profile sheets, like maybe for a side road or something like that, and so maybe you don't want to populate this entire section. So it really just, all this kind of depends on your project, and it's best to just understand how the system works, and then you can set it up the way that works best for you and your project. Okay, so I've made these changes. I'm going to exit out of this session now because I'm still sitting in my sheets model, but now I've made some changes, right? So if I wanted to update so it's looking at the latest, and it's still looking at that latest Still looking at the latest standard. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to repath out this, because really, ultimately, I want this to be pointing to that work set that contains the project-specific information, right? So I'm going to double-click here. I hit Browse, and then rather than the standards, I want to go to where we just saved the sheet border. So I.consultant, work set, student 1, standards, sheet borders. And if I select it here, and I say OK, remember I made that change in the project specific area. So now I'm seeing, see, it says County Highway 14, which is great. And then the other thing I was talking about was some of this other information here. And again, in the labeling chapter, I think I'll get into that. I'll show you how you can go into your work set settings, put some information in there, and then this text is not normal text. This text is actually not even sure what you call it, but it's linked to the work set, and so it will, this the actual text will actually change if you change it at that location. And then I guess the third option, third way of doing all of this, if that was really too much to take in and you said, well, I don't care, I'll key in that information over and over and over again, I guess you could, if you desired, to just take and select everything that's really in the Sheets file. If I hit delete, see, it's going to get rid of all that text there. And then you could fill out the text at this location like maybe you have in the past. But remember, if you do it that way, you're going to have to key it in on every single sheet. So I definitely recommend taking the time to understand how the sheets work, where the sheet borders are located. Step through this video multiple times if you need to in practice with it. Get an understanding, and once you understand it, you can operate definitely most efficiently and be able to very quickly fill in this information, which is kind of annoying on projects to have to do over and over again. Okay, so that's it for setting up sheets. I'm going to end the chapter here, and then the next chapter we'll talk about annotation and labeling.